important net research being conducted at Stanford. In general, philanthropy is an incredibly nimble and targeted way of helping researchers like our team do net-specific research. It allows us to get things done more quickly and do them in a very focused way. So we appreciate you gathering today to consider fundraising for neuroendocrine tumor research. In addition, I would like to introduce Dr. Shaheen, who is a new medical oncologist at Stanford and also a neuroendocrine tumor expert. Shagufta participated in the first ever neuroendocrine tumor fellowship that occurred last year at Stanford. It was a one-year fellowship that gave her additional exposure to taking care of patients with neuroendocrine tumors and experience in conducting research. Dr. Shaheen's fellowship was also funded through philanthropic gifts. And so as you can see, these types of gifts can make an incredible difference, both in terms of research, but also in terms of educating another generation of physicians who learn more about neuroendocrine tumors. Dr. Shaheen today will be giving an overview of neuroendocrine tumors and cancer and can hopefully address any of your questions. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there today with you in person, but hope to do so on a future year. And I hope that you have a wonderful day to honor Srini Aravelli, and I'd like to thank Ms. Harini Aravelli for putting this all together. Thank you.
I would like to start by thanking Harini Aravelli and Shaheen Aravelli Foundation and all the volunteers. Can you hear me? And all the volunteers who put together incredible effort to make this event about cancer awareness happen. I know it takes a lot of awareness and a lot of effort for everyone to come together for such an event. I also want to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity. I feel quite humbled to be here today to raise cancer awareness and also to represent Stanford. So, outline for the talk today, what I want to really focus is what is cancer, and what are the stages and why do some people get it. Then we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about neuroendocrine tumors and neuroendocrine cancers, understand a little bit about what pathology means to distinguish between neuroendocrine tumors and neuroendocrine cancers. I'll briefly talk about what we mean by functional tumors, also talk a little bit about what are the treatments we have for neuroendocrine tumors right now, and why we need research in rare cancers. I think it's a really important point that we will try to talk about in the end. So what is cancer? Before I go there, I want to let you know that our cells, like in our human body, are very tightly regulated. We have something called tumor suppressor genes. So these genes are activated and they make sure that they keep the cell cycle in checks and balance, and the cell doesn't go rogue and gets uncontrolled growth. We also have proto-oncogenes. So these are genes that do the opposite, basically. They will make the cell go uncontrollably. What usually happens is these proto-oncogenes are suppressed, they are not activated. However, when the cell cycle, as we progress, we have multiple cell cycles, and we make mistakes. These cells make mistakes. They are also called mutations. When these mutations accumulate, this balance in our cell cycle gets disrupted. So the proto-oncogenes take precedence, they are more active, and the tumor suppressor genes are not working anymore, which means the cell cycle is growing uncontrollably, which results in these cells forming this massive growths that may be limited. They may not travel from one place to another or go to a different organ. In that situation, it's called a benign tumor. However, in most cases, these cells grow uncontrollably. They actually invade the arteries, the veins, and by means of that, go to far organs. For example, if a cancer starts in lung and goes to liver, now it's called stage 4 or it's metastasized. And that's basically what cancer is. It's the propensity of it growing uncontrollably and going to far organs, causing trouble. And same thing, when it goes to a different organ or different lymph nodes, it's called metastasis. And that's when, unfortunately, it's uncurable. And these metastases, they occupy a significant amount of normal tissue. For example, in liver, which is the most vital part of like our body, if it invades the liver and occupies a large portion of the liver will not function and it will cause organ failure. So when we talk about cancer, I want to make a point here. All cancers are not similar. Cancer, in fact, has like different type of, like, there are many types. When we talk about cancer, it's not just one disease. It's a lot of cancers falling into that umbrella. Even within one cancer, for example, breast cancer, there are multiple types of cancers, like they are hormone positive, hormone negative, triple negative, and likewise, you talk about colon cancer. Now we have like certain mutations that render them more aggressive than others. So just keep in mind that cancer, when you talk about or hear that term, it doesn't mean just one disease. There are too many types. And I just listed a few of the more common ones. Like, for example, adenocarcinoma is the cancer starting from a cell from a gland in our body. Likewise, squamous cell carcinoma is a cancer that starts in squamous cell. That's another cell in our body. And neuroendocrine tumor starts from neuroendocrine cells, which I talk in a little bit more detail later. And neuroendocrine cancer, why they are called different, I'll also talk a little bit later. And small cell, large cell carcinoma are also the type of cell they, they form from, but they are more or less closely related to neuroendocrine carcinoma. Sarcoma are cancers that are derived from connective tissue disorder, connective tissues. And again, sarcoma itself, like there are many different types of them. And I just want to give you an overview that cancer is not just one disease. So why do people get cancer? There are many causes. Like, research has shown that 20% of the cancers are related to obesity, having a high BMI, being less active, not having proper nutrition, eating a lot of processed food. But that's just 20%. There are other people that are very healthy and are following, like, they're very healthy, they're very active, they follow a good diet but still get cancer. But these are the patients that unfortunately we don't know why they got it, like they don't have the specific mutation. But in general, environment is implicated in someone having a high risk for getting cancer. And what is environment? Environment is anything that our body interacts with. It can be the pollutants, it can be the chemicals that your body is in contact with. It's probably the radiation that's in our ecosystem. Then the next thing is lifestyle. Someone can be overweight, can be their diet can be not very healthy, like processed food, high processed sugar, high processed carbohydrates. They all have been linked to someone putting at risk for cancer. Likewise, if we eat healthy food, which comprise of fruits and vegetables, actually 2.5 servings of or cups of fruits and vegetables we are supposed to eat them every day. So someone who's not doing that, someone who is having, including a lot of processed sugar, smoking, alcohol, they're implicated in certain cancers. For example, lung cancer is very closely related to smoking, but not all lung cancers. I do want to point that out. Alcohol in liver cancer, we talk about diet, obesity, then radiation. If a young person, for some reason, has to have many CAT scans down the road, that does put them at risk for having cancers down the line, not immediately, but decades from when they had it. So we have to be mindful of that. Certain infections, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, they are causative organs for causative organisms for liver cancer. HPV, EBV, they are also DNA, and they are viruses that are implicated in cervical cancer, oral cancer. HTLV is a form of virus that can cause some kind of lymphoma. H. pylori is another organism, although it's not a virus, but it is an organism that can cause gastric cancer. So these are also some of the reasons why someone might get cancer. And then there are things that are not under control. There are genetic syndromes. someone who is born with a mutation and that puts them at risk for having cancer. For example, BRCA1 and 2, I think a lot of people might have heard about that term. So these are the mutation that gets passed on from generation to generation, puts them at risk for breast cancer in BRCA1 and 2. These patients can also have ovarian cancer. And then there are Lynch syndrome, something called familial adenomatous polyposis. These are syndromes where patients can have colon cancer. In Lynch syndrome, patients can also have gastric cancer, breast cancer. They are increased risk, those families are increased for having those cancer, endometrial cancer or ovarian cancer. Fanconi's is another syndrome where there's a certain mutation that puts the patient at risk for having leukemia. And then hormone replacement therapy is something we used to do decades ago for women who had postmenopausal symptoms, hot flashes and things like that. But then we learned that it does put patients at risk for having breast cancer and endometrial cancer. So we don't, it's in the long-term view, so we don't, we try to shy away from that. So the next thing, once we know what type of cancer, where it started, then we want to know what is the stage of cancer. It's really very important because it guides treatment. In most cases, surgery is the cure for cancer, and we want to know whether or not a patient can have surgery. And stage of cancer kind of dictates that. Up to stage 3, in most cases, you can have surgery. Stage 4, sometimes in rare cases and rare situations, we can still do that. But in general, stage is like how far the cancer has gone. And this is a really simple overview of stages. It's very complicated than this, and it's different for different cancers. But in general, if the tumor started and is localized in an area, we call it stage 1. It's usually about like 1 or 2 centimeters or something like that. Thank you. And stage 2 is when the tumor gets slightly bigger, but it's still localized. It's still not gone away from where it started. And in some cases, there can be 1 or 2 lymph nodes involved, but in general, when there are local lymph nodes involved, we call it stage 3. We can even think about surgery at that time. It's still something we can render cure by surgery and doing chemotherapy at the same time. And stage 4 is when the distant lymph nodes are involved or distant organs are involved. That's when it becomes really tough. That's when people are, for most part, not curable. So we really want to, at the get-go, know what the stage of the cancer is. So switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about neuroendocrine tumors and neuroendocrine cancer. So neuroendocrine tumors actually start from neuroendocrine cell. These cells are distributed throughout the body, and these cells are activated by nerves. That's why it's called neuro. And then once they're stimulated, they can release hormones. So that's why they're called neuroendocrine cells. And they're present everywhere in our body. They were actually found and classified by Dr. Urbendorfer over 100 years ago. And at the time, they were thought to be benign. They were thought that they had no malignant potential, they couldn't metastasize, and they couldn't invade organs. But then we learned that's not true. They in fact are malignant, they are cancerous. And if it starts in the pancreas, it used to be called islet cell, and then if it started outside of pancreas, it used to be called carcinoid. We're trying to shy away because it can get confusing. There are just too many names. And World Health Organization finally classified them as neuroendocrine tumor or neuroendocrine neoplasm in 2010. And we try to use those terms now. So when we talk about NETs, we want to make sure that we know where it starts from. Most common is the small bowel, also called the ileum. The second most common is the lung, and then the pancreas. And then, as you see, there are other areas, rectum, colon, and these are very, very rare spots to have neuroendocrine tumors, but they can happen. Before, we used to classify them according to the embryological development. We don't use that anymore, but you can still see patients or some doctors using foregut, midgut, hindgut as their classification. So As you know, neuroendocrine tumors, you must have heard, are very rare, and it still stands true. The incidence is about a little less than 7 per 100,000. However, if you see the incidence is rising, the top portion, the top line that's blue is actually all cancers. And if you see the orange line on the bottom, on the top picture, is the neuroendocrine tumor. And if you see since 1973, the incidence of cancer, all cancers, are kind of plateaued and it a little bit decreased at the end, but the neuroendocrine tumor, the bottom line, the orange line, you can see it's steadily increasing. So neuroendocrine tumor, the incidence is overall increasing. And we want to know why, and there's so many questions that we have around it, and working as to know the answers. It is also the second most prevalent GI malignancy. It's not recognized, it doesn't get that attention, and that's why we're here. In terms of survival, for the lower grade, the less aggressive ones, this is the survival graph for them. The median survival is about 33 months, but pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors, they survive less than those. They're more aggressive. Their survival is 24 months. But again, these are the lower grade, grade 1 and 2 that I'll talk about, not the poorly differentiated high-grade neuroendocrine tumors. These are some of the CAT scan pictures showing the primary site. The first picture, that's the lung. If you look at the CAT scan, you have to imagine that you are looking at a patient from their feet. That patient is lying and they are kind of bread slices. So it's the portion, so this is the lung, this is our heart here, and this is the lung tumor, the neuroendocrine tumor here. And if you see this part here, this whole thing is pancreas, and this big mass here is pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor. Here, there's a small tumor in the, what we call small intestine or the small bowel. So in terms of terminology, when we talk about NETs, they're a little bit unique than other cancers. We have to grade them, and grade basically comprises of two things: how fast the tumor is growing. That is something that we do based on mitotic index and something called Ki-67, and how well they are differentiated. Differentiation is how closely they look to the cell of origin on a microscope, under a microscope. And well differentiated is good news. That means they are still holding their architecture. But poorly differentiated is when the cell goes rogue, like they're angry looking, they don't look anything like each other. Everyone is kind of on their own path. They are growing very fast, they're very aggressive. And these, in general, stain for special stains, synaptophysin and chromogranin A. And we at Stanford always request an expert pathology review because a lot of them are misdiagnosed in the community. Just because it's so rare, doctors don't have experience how to treat them, or pathologists don't see these cases as often, so they don't really know what to look for. So there's a lot of like misdiagnosis in the community. So talking about the grade again, here, as I mentioned, there's differentiation. You can see in the first slide here, the cells look very formed in a way that here you will see how they're like not forming a pattern. Again, it's getting even worse, and then here they're really bizarre looking. Their nucleoli, cell has a nucleus, and when it completely fills the whole cell, it just looks bizarre, and they're really very fast growing. And we talked about the Ki-67 and mitotic index. So here, we can see the mitotic index is less than 2, so we call it well differentiated grade 1. Here the mitotic index is 3 to 20, so it's a grade 2 tumor, but still well differentiated. Likewise for pancreas here, if the Ki-67 is more than 20, but the cells are still well differentiated. It's called a well differentiated grade 3. Sorry. And And the last one here, I don't use the pointer. The last one is a poorly differentiated neuroendocrine tumor, which is high grade and is more aggressive than the regular neuroendocrine tumors. So in terms of classification, again, we put them initially in two buckets. We want to, on the outside, know whether they are well differentiated or poorly differentiated. Well differentiated for pancreas, we have three sub-buckets, which is low grade, grade 1, grade 2, which is the Ki67 that's higher, 2 to 20, and then we have the high grade. But we don't have that for the other GI nets, but it's coming, it's in works. I think we'll have a separate classification. But for poorly differentiated, you can see there is high grade and the Ki67 is more than 20. So neuroendocrine carcinoma, so basically they are the worst, the most aggressive of neuroendocrine tumors. They are on the really far end of the spectrum, where grade 1 is on the left and the poorly differentiated neuroendocrine carcinoma is on the really right, far right. So these tumors are more aggressive than actually their adenocarcinoma counterpart. For example, if there is a poorly differentiated neuroendocrine tumor of colon, that is much more aggressive than a regular garden variety colon cancer, which is usually adenocarcinoma. So these cancers, they can be small cell called SNECs or large cell called LNECs, and they are quite aggressive and treated with aggressive chemotherapy, usually something called platinum-based carboplatin or etoposide plus a cisplatin drug. I will probably just go briefly. These low-grade neuroendocrine tumors are also functional. They either secrete 5-HI or serotonin or other insulin or somatostatin, or they can be non-functional. I won't go into the details of this. The other thing about neuroendocrine tumor is they have a specific receptor called somatostatin receptor. These somatostatin receptors are very unique to neuroendocrine tumors. However, when they become neuroendocrine poorly differentiated carcinoma, they kind of lose this receptor. They lose their differentiation. But for most part, for grade 1 to grade 2, these receptors for most patients are present. And there are 5 types. The most common is somatostatin receptor 2. And we have a specific drug that binds that is also used as initial treatment, or also if you couple radiation with octreotide, it binds to this receptor and then we can see it better in picture. So that has really changed the paradigm of treatment for neuroendocrine tumors that are well differentiated and grade 1 and 2 in the last couple of years. This is a similar CAT scan that's called dotatate 68 scan. It's very specific to neuroendocrine tumors. It was approved just 2 years ago. In the first picture, you can see the black spots. These are just depicting like the tumor is localized. They have just a few spots in the liver. But in the second one, it's a liver-dominant disease. The liver is full of all these black spots. So it's all you can see. Before this gallium-68 dotatate scan, the pictures were not that good, and we couldn't really see clearly where this whole disease was. And in the third picture, you can see a widely metastatic disease. You can see the spots everywhere. So these are all tumor cells in bone, in liver, and in lymph nodes. We also test the grade 1 and 2, the well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumor. They secrete all these hormones that are listed there, and that sometimes helps us when we are treating patients. If these tumor marks are going down, whether or not the treatment is responding. However, we never change any treatment based on that. We just complement them. Like if we're seeing a patient has increase in tumor growth on a CAT scan and these tumor markers are also going up, that kind of gives us a sense that the patient is not doing well and we need to change treatment. However, when we talk about the poorly differentiated neuroendocrine tumors, which are high grade, they have high Ki67, mostly over 50, generally in like 70 to 80 range. These tumors do not secrete, they are not functional, they don't secrete those hormones, so it's not helpful, or they don't have any tumor markers, so it's not helpful in those patients. So these are the advances in treatment, mostly for the well-differentiated and grade 1 and 2 patients. So a long time ago, we used to just have streptozotocin. That was a chemotherapy that we used for a long time until 1990s. We had nothing else. And then the octreotide that I was mentioning, it's a somatostatin receptor that binds to that receptor and kind of blocks it. And after that, we've had a few other things. For example, everolimus, it's a pill that a patient can take. It's something called mTOR inhibitor. It disrupts the cancer cell pathway and kind of inhibits its growth. But it doesn't give us a lot of shrinkage, but at least we had something than nothing. And then sunitinib is, again, a similar, it's called a VEGF inhibitor. It inhibits a cell cycle in a different way and decreases the cell cycle growth or the rate of production, and it's only useful in pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. A lanreotide is similar to octreotide. It just is given as every 4-week shot. And then telotrestat was approved a couple of years ago just for the diarrhea for the carcinoid syndrome. And then this is something that was a game changer in the treatment of NETs. It used to be only approved in Europe, but we had a phase 3 trial. Stanford was one of the big participants of this trial. And it was approved last year by FDA for the grade 1 and 2 neuroendocrine tumors. So it's you can think of it as a targeted radiation therapy. It's called peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. It basically takes advantage of the somatostatin receptors on the tumor cells. So you bind a ligand, like a protein, and bind radiation to it. And that the idea is that it will go and find its receptor in the tumor cell, binds it, and delivers the radiation that will cause tumor cell death. Again, unfortunately, that's not what we can use in the high-grade neuroendocrine tumors because, as I said, these cells become so aggressive that they basically do their own thing. They lose all these, the cells of origin that they begin with, they lose all these characteristics. So they're just growing uncontrollably. So we don't use PRRT or Lutathera on poorly differentiated, not yet until we have something that helps us take control of that disease. Another trial that was presented by Dr. Kuhn last year at ASCO is a combination chemotherapy called capecitabine and temozolomide. These are also chemotherapy drugs taken by mouth, and they are also effective in not in lower grade, but mostly in like medium grade or grade 2 or grade 3 well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumors. So where are we now? Obviously, you saw from 1980s, we have more options, but if you look at other cancers that are more prevalent, we have not made that progress because this is a rare cancer. There's not a lot of patients that we can recruit for clinical trials. There are a lot of burdens or there are a lot of hurdles that we have to cross for someone to motivate to do research in these rare tumors. There's also a lot of things we don't know, why they go so rogue, why they behave so aggressively. So we need to know what these genes are doing on a cancer level. What is the gene-gene interaction? What are the pathways that we can tap into and target therapies and also personalized treatments? Because every patient's cancer is different. No two cancers are similar. There are clinical trials in progress, but again, they're not as many as they are for the more prevalent cancers. So the other thing about rare cancers is, we really need to have more options for those patients because when you look at NIH funding, they don't get much funding. The NIH funding is mostly allocated to the tumors that are more common, that are more prevalent, because it feels like if you do research in those, in those cancers, you may save more patients, but then you have to look for neuroendocrine tumor or specific, or similar rare tumors. I mean, these patients also need treatment. We can't just ignore them. They are growing, as I said, the incidence is growing, and who knows in future how fast it will go. So that is a gap that I think we all have to fill. The other big problem or the hurdle for treating rare cancers is the incentive for a pharmaceutical company to develop drugs or targeted therapies in those cancers, because for them it's not very profitable. It's not very profitable to invest so much money or effort and then develop a drug that will only benefit few patients. And I think it comes down to the dollar amount in the end, so it's not very profitable to them. They don't have incentive, so that's where we also lag behind. But that doesn't mean that we stop dreaming or we stop hoping. We are still hoping, and our dream is to cure cancer one day, including the rare tumors. And I think, in my opinion, I think you are the champions, and you sitting here making this first step about awareing and causing this huge awareness of rare cancers, especially in community, and every effort starts with a baby step. So I think this is very important for everyone. It's very important that we all come in together, learn about why rare cancers matter and what we need to do. We need to bring awareness, we need to pitch in whatever we can, and then move forward and march forward, and hopefully we can cure cancer one day, including the rare cancers. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. I would like to acknowledge the efforts of Dr. Kamala Kunz. She's the one who started the neuroendocrine tumor program at Stanford. She does a lot of research, and I thank her. Also the Srini Errol Foundation, all the volunteers who are here today, spending their time and making sure we all get educated. I'll take questions now or later.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.